You're listening to the Unwritable Rant podcast with your host, author, and occasional misanthrope, Juliette Miranda. Go to theunwritablerant.com and you can subscribe on iTunes or connect with the show on Facebook and Twitter.
Hey there, y'all. It's Juliette Miranda. Welcome to episode number 76 of the Unwritable Rant podcast. Once again, y'all, I have a cocktail in my hand, and I am going to insist that you join me in a toast. Doesn't matter what you're drinking. I prefer bourbon. Y'all know that. So whatever it is, get it in a glass. Let's raise it up and say cheers. Whew. All right. Today, I am drinking my favorite cocktail after the Manhattan. Yes, I am in a very celebratory style mood today, so I have made myself a Sazerac. Sazerac is something of a classic cocktail. It is made with rye whiskey, bitters, a little bit of absinthe, and a little bit of lemon. It is potent, and it is absolutely delicious. Now, I have made my Sazerac with the appropriately named Sazerac Straight Rye whiskey. For a rye, this is a very mellow kind of drink. Now, I'm talking about drinking it straight, not mixed in a cocktail right now. And I have to say, of all of the rye whiskeys I've ever had, this one is probably almost the fruitiest. It's got a little bit of mint in it, kind of a little bit of spice, but not as much as you normally get with a rye. And that's why I think it works really well in this cocktail, because you've got so many really dominant flavors. You know, you've got the bitters. You've got that little bit of absinthe in there. You know, there's a lot going on, so you need a rye that can kind of balance all of that together. So if you were going to be having yourself a Sazerac, I highly recommend you make it with a Sazerac Rye whiskey. As for me, well, I'm going to drink some more. Hang on, y'all. Oh, that tastes like New Orleans. Oh, I love it. Now, I don't know if y'all are aware of this or not, but there is a holiday that is rapidly approaching. That would be my birthday. Oh, I know, it is rather self-indulgent to celebrate your birthday once you get past your 20s, but I can't say I much care. For me, it's not so much about age as it is just being happy that I am here. So every year I try to do something a little, special for myself just to acknowledge the day. And right now, I can't help but think about what may be the greatest birthday present I ever gave myself. Now, on this podcast, y'all might have noticed that I do my best to conceal the identities about the people that I talk about. However, for you to really get the magnitude of this story, I've got to name names. I figure since in the end I'm kind of the idiot in this story, it won't get me into too much trouble. And besides, I'm kind of guessing the band Bon Jovi has better things to do than come after a podcaster like me. Say what you will about Bon Jovi, and I'm sure I've heard it all before and thought it myself. They were still the heroes of my adolescence. We all have that one band growing up, the one band that just means everything in our little worlds. You listen to them when you feel great. You listen to them to make things feel better. And for me, that band was Bon Jovi. In fact, I think it's safe to say that it is because of Bon Jovi that I actually started writing about music and musicians. It sounds a little cliche to say it aloud, but truly, their music inspired me to share my feelings about music. Also, I knew that writing was my one key. It was my golden ticket, if you will, to meet the bands that I loved. And I had one goal through it all, and that was to interview the band Bon Jovi. Now, I knew they weren't just going to hand me an interview with the band. I was going to have to work for it, and I did. I slugged it out for several years, interviewing every upcoming band that was out. And again, you have to remember that this is several decades ago. I didn't have the internet. I didn't have social media. I really had to work to get these interviews. And to be taken seriously as a journalist, it meant having them placed in actual magazines versus, a blog. Now, over the course of those years, I developed a working relationship with Bon Jovi's publicist. And to her credit, she was an amazingly tolerant woman because for every project that we worked together on, every band that she sent me to interview or review, I would end every conversation that we had asking her, "So when are you going to get me that Bon Jovi interview?" And at first she would always laugh and be like, oh, Juliette, you know that's not going to happen. But then over time, as I built up my credibility, that no became a maybe. And then eventually it became a, well, let me see what I can do. Oh, y'all, I remember the day so perfectly when she gave me that call I had been waiting for. The one where she said, Juliette, I got you your interview. Now, it wasn't with John Bon Jovi and it wasn't with Richie Sambora. She'd gotten me an interview with Tico Torres, the drummer. You see, at that point in time, Bon Jovi was on a little bit of a decline. The band was taking a break from recording music and putting out albums, and they were all pursuing their own individual projects. And that was how she happened to get me in with Tico. I didn't care, though. I was just excited to be talking to somebody who was a part of the band that I worshipped. So I slaved over my interview questions. I spent days upon days crafting what I thought were illuminating questions that would really get to the core of who Tico was and how he contributed to Bon Jovi. I wanted to know where their songs came from. I wanted to know everything that he was willing to tell me. Oh, y'all, how I wish I could tell you that interview went exactly the way I hoped. It would be so nice to be able to say that I got on the phone and acted like a professional. But I didn't. Something snapped in my wacky little brain the second I heard him say, "This is Tico Torres," and I immediately lost every single shred of journalistic integrity that I had and turned into a blathering little fangirl. It was terrible. I spent 20 minutes babbling about how much I love the band, talking about my favorite songs, about the time that I'd seen them live. None of it made any sense. It was probably the most awkward 20-minute phone call that Tico has ever been on. And when I hung up the phone, I knew I blew it. I started sobbing uncontrollably because I had totally let myself down. The one interview that I had set as my goal, that I had worked so hard to achieve over the last 4 years, turned out to be the single worst interview I have done in my entire career. I was disgusted with myself. And for the next month, I beat the hell out of myself. But then one day I woke up, I accepted reality, and I made myself a promise that one day, it didn't matter when, it didn't matter how, I was going to redeem myself to Bon Jovi. Now, fast forward a couple of years later. By this point in time, I am an official rock and roll journalist. I've interviewed much bigger bands than Bon Jovi. I've worked for record labels. I've handled tour publicity for a whole lot of bands. I am, truly, in my element. Now, my interest in Bon Jovi by this point in time had kind of waned. I was moving on to other sounds, other types of music, and kind of returning to my country roots. But one day, I got a press release that said Bon Jovi was going to be coming to town right around my birthday, and I knew right then and there that 1, this was going to be the best birthday present I could ever give myself, because 2, I was going to make my promise to myself happen. Fortunately, I had a great relationship with their tour publicist. And when I told her my story, she was more than happy to accommodate me with tickets and passes for the show. And I'll tell you, the first thing I did when I got there was hunt down Tico. I apologized profusely for that stupid interview I had done with him. And thank God he didn't remember it or me. But we certainly had a good laugh about it, and he was very gracious to accept my apology. So I felt good about that. I felt as though I had made some amends, but I knew that I needed more. This was my birthday, after all, and it was probably the last time I was ever going to be in the presence of Bon Jovi. So I knew I had to make this special. To really make this the event that I wanted it to be, I was going to have to talk to the man, to John. I had practiced in my head exactly what I wanted to say to him. I just wanted to tell him thanks and say that his music inspired me to become a journalist. It would be simple, it would be graceful, and it would be classy. Sadly, however, those are 3 words I would never use in a million years to describe myself. So why I thought I would be any of those 3 things when presented with the king of my rock and roll fantasies is beyond me. I walked up to John Bon Jovi, held out my hand, started to shake his, and then froze. Once again, I had reverted back to the mental aptitude of a 12-year-old girl at a New Kids on the Block concert. I stood there staring at him, squeezing his hand like some sort of prehistoric bird, probably drooling a little bit and saying nothing. At this point in time, I had what I can only say is an out-of-body experience because I recall kind of looking down at the situation and seeing myself standing there like an idiot and him kind of cocking his head at me. I was mortified with myself, and I started mentally yelling at myself, saying, "You moron, you idiot, say something resembling anything reasonably intelligent." Well, that got the deranged little neurons in my brain firing. But did I say something intelligent? No, I didn't say anything intelligent. I don't know from what depths of my brain this came from, but the only thing that I could manage to blurt out to Jon Bon Jovi was, "My mother thinks you have a nice ass." Again, I step back and I'm looking at the situation, and I see Jon Bon Jovi staring at me as though he is wondering who he's going to have to fire for allowing me into his inner sanctum. I realize that I have maybe 5 seconds to redeem myself. Now, the words, "My mother thinks you have a nice ass," are hovering in the air between us. There is no sucking those words back. There's no denying I said them. I realized right then and there that I was going to have to own that statement. It was a risk, I knew it, but I had to do something. So I put on my best angelic expression, bat my eyes at John a little bit. If I had a dimple, I would have flashed it. I smile at him, and as sweetly as I can muster, I say, "You know, I don't think I'll ever live it down if I walk out of here without having touched it." John would have been well within his rights to have me escorted out of the building at that point in time, and I wouldn't have blamed him. But something happened there in that room. I don't know what. Maybe he felt sorry for me. Maybe I caught him in a good mood. Or maybe the fates just smiled down upon me knowing it was my birthday. Because the next thing I know, Jon Bon Jovi is smiling at me, flashing those teeth, and then he turns around and says, "Go for it." I know, I couldn't believe it either. Opportunities like that only come along once in a lifetime, so I went for it. And I had to laugh, because in all of my planning and in all of my fantasies, never once did I expect that the Bon Jovi chapter of my life would end like this. I wasn't saying thank you. I wasn't telling him how much he inspired me. I never even got to tell them that I was a writer. Instead, I just copped a feel. And you know what? It was glorious. Well, I don't know how else to follow up that story but with a shot of my drink. So if you will excuse me, I'm going to have a little bit more Sazerac. Hold, please. Oh, yum. And I don't know if I'm talking about Jon Bon Jovi's ass or my Sazerac at this point. Now, there is another holiday looming on the horizon, which I'm sure you're all well aware of, and that's Valentine's Day. I know this because I just ate a chocolate heart that told me to be your own Valentine. I had bought that bag of chocolates on sale at Target, so I suppose getting unsolicited wisdom could be considered a bonus. Although really, at this point in time, it would probably better serve all of us if our chocolates said something useful like, "How many of these have you eaten?" or, "You know, chocolate goes straight to your ass." The message just seemed a little bit feeble, and it certainly didn't seem empowering, which is, I suspect, what they were going for. I don't know, I kind of shrugged the whole thing off, but I'll tell you, if that message had fallen in my hands in years past, I can guarantee you that that chocolater would have received a care package from me in the mail that would have included several of those chocolate heart wrappers nailed to a plank, a few random tufts of my hair, and a hastily scrawled message instructing them on exactly where to stuff their words of wisdom. I totally get it, y'all. Valentine's Day is not for everybody, so I'm not going to sit here and wax poetic on how much I love my man. Valentine's Day is a volatile holiday that has decidedly limited appeal. There was no worse holiday to experience than Valentine's Day when I was doing the whole online dating scene. It was a veritable typhoid Mary of Valentine's Day issues. And I can only thank the great Cupid or whatever figurehead lords over matters of the heart that I will never have to venture into those festering waters again. I mean, it was crazy. Starting around January or so, you would start getting these emails from people as Valentine's Day approached. And they were all clearly these copy and paste mass emails from guys who clearly weren't hugged enough as children. And they would promise me and, every other woman on the planet, I'm sure, all these romantic notions like poetry by a roaring fire, bottles of wine in the rain, anything just to have a date on Valentine's Day. Then, of course, there were the other guys, the ones that I typically wound up with, who would sooner flee the country than dish out sentiment that could be misconstrued as having some sort of actual meaning. I had one guy tell me that I shouldn't expect anything from him on Satan's Valentine Day. And he really should have saved his breath because I wasn't expecting much from him as a human being, much less on some sort of holiday. But here's the thing, in all of my stories, I realized that I have really painted myself as kind of a victim. That these jackasses that I was dating did all of these horrible things to me. But I'll tell you, I've done some pretty horrible things of my own. And somehow most of them always seem to crop up on Valentine's Day. In fact, one year the day fell directly in the middle of this especially gut-wrenching breakup. I mean, it was the kind of breakup that doesn't entirely stick the first go-around, and it kind of leaves both people hashing things out over sentimental emails and personal belongings that you can't quite return but don't want to set fire to just yet. You see, I was a very tough person to break up with, especially when I felt that the relationship had potential. I just didn't like to be discounted, so when some guy told me that he wasn't good enough for me, my rationale was, well, you let me decide what's good enough for me. You're not going anywhere, buddy. I was kind of prone to lurking around in the shadows after a breakup. Kind of like the devil, and I'd wait for a moment of weakness where I would pounce back on that relationship train. I was always that horribly manipulative girl who would send emails when you least expect it, saying things like, "Oh, I just found your shirt in my closet. I'd consider giving it back to you except for the fact that it looks better on me than you." Sometimes my ploys worked, sometimes they didn't. Mostly, they just caused everybody a tremendous amount of grief. And that was the position I was in this one particular Valentine's Day. And worse yet, I started the day at 8 o'clock in the morning with a shot of whiskey. Jack Daniels, to be specific. And it was kind of a breakfast ritual that I performed on days when I knew the climate at the corporate job that I had then would just be completely unbearable. So that didn't exactly get my day off to the best start. And then, of course, you show up at your shitty corporate job and you see that everybody there is drenched in Valentine's Day stickiness. There are gigantic helium heart balloons, there are heart-shaped cookies, there are pink frosted cupcakes everywhere, and the stench of roses is just hovering in the air like an entity. It is not a good day for the lovelorn, I get it. And that particular day, well, let's just say my emergency flask was put to very good use. Now, for the past week or so, my ex and I had been trading these kind of sentimental emails back and forth, but he was amazingly silent that day, which in hindsight is wiser than I would ever credit him with being now. Unfortunately for me, I had some sort of involuntary chemical reaction that just made sending him a Valentine's Day e-card a perfectly logical idea. I'm an unconventional kind of girl, of course, so I didn't want to send him a standard Valentine. And really, I was at the point where the hurt that I had experienced in the relationship was slowly turning into anger, so the whole teddy bears and hearts thing was definitely out of the question. Thankfully, of course, the internet, as it always does, came to my rescue, just like it does for every single fool who has enough skill to manage a search engine. Of course, I was using keywords like unconventional, unromantic, and vicious in my search, so the card that I wound up with, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly nice. I don't recall where I found it, somewhere in the bowels of the internet. But I added a short message to it, and I sent it off without so much as a rational thought. And it wasn't until a few hours later, after I obsessively checked my email to no response from him, that I decided to go back and re-look at the card I had just sent. Y'all, here's what it was. It was a picture that was meant to look as though it had been torn from a children's adventure book. It was a cartoon. And it depicted a man being pulled underwater by a dozen sadistic-looking skeletons. Now, it came with its own message, of course, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't entirely remember it, but essentially it said, in some countries, being raped by underwater pirate skeletons is still a viable way to celebrate Valentine's Day. Needless to say, with that card, our breakup became 100% official. I don't know exactly what I was thinking when I picked that card out. I probably thought it was funny at the time. Although I've since learned that most men don't appreciate implied violation by skeletons or otherwise, and especially not on a holiday. Go figure. Anyway, I share that story just to let y'all know that, yes, I too have my issues. Even on Valentine's Day. So anyway, for anyone who has anything less than affection for this oh-so-festive day, I strongly suggest avoiding chocolate and the internet and just sticking with bourbon. That's what I'm going to do. Like right now. Oh, Sazerac. Such a complex, crazy kind of drink. It certainly isn't an easy drink. It's an acquired taste, kind of like reading Hemingway for the first time. Oh, but look at me. Getting all sentimental about Hemingway. Oh, well, that's enough out of me, y'all. I know that when I start waxing poetic about dead writers, I may be nearing my limit. So I'm going to take my leave now, y'all, but I do want to remind you, head on over to theunwritablerant.com and subscribe to my newsletter. I send out updates every week. Occasionally, I send rather embarrassing videos of myself, give you a couple of bourbon recommendations, and you will be the first to hear about all of my upcoming interviews. And of course, at theunwritablerant.com, you can also catch all of the back episodes of the podcast. And now I am out. Hope y'all have a great week. I will chat with you again next week. Cheers, y'all.
You was pretty as a Sunday morning, standing on the corner at Carondelet. What you say we make our way up to Bourbon, couple hurricanes and a hand grenade, and get blown away. Let the chips fall where they may. If it's all the same, what you say, bon ton relay. Hey, pretty mama, I can smell the gumbo, sweetest taste of honeysuckle on my lips. Good God Almighty, I can hear the trombone. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this. Come a little closer, honey, let me hold you. Nothing tastes better than a bourbon kiss. You can be the flower on my magnolia. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this.